Well, welcome back to another week. I know I'm kind of back here alone again. James should be coming in within the next few weeks, is the hope. He is currently still studying abroad in Sydney, Australia. But big thing to talk about is NFL is back. We obviously just had the NFL Hall of Fame game, Cardinals Panthers, which honestly might have been the best Hall of Fame game of all time. We saw key plays from veterans. I'm thinking Andrew Billings and his big sack. Thinking, big plays from key rookies, Carson Beck. Overall, just a really impactful NFL Hall of Fame game, including a game-winning, rushing touchdown from Haynes King. So while I was watching that game, it kind of gave me the idea to go in this route for this week's live. And I'm going to pick between around 10-ish different position groups from a few different teams, both AFC and NFC, who I think it's very key to watch throughout this preseason to potentially look at a new starter or just who's going to overtake that position. So with kind of all that being said, I went ahead and picked out about 10 different teams with like 11 different position groups that you need to keep an eye on in this preseason. So starting off, obviously with the Hall of Fame game, I am looking at the Arizona Cardinals to kind of start this whole thing off. And with Arizona Cardinals, I think it is a little obvious, but I am looking at the current quarterback situation with the Cardinals. Kind of just give a little brief history about it. Obviously, last year, Kyler Murray was the starter for the beginning of the season, then he got hurt. Kind of also benched, and then Jacoby Brissett came in. He's a long-time NFL kind of journeyman backup quarterback, and he balled out. Now, him balling out didn't really register any wins per se, but he, as a passer, was efficient. He actually broke the record one time last year of most completions in one game. So coming into that in this offseason, Jacoby Brissett wanted a new contract. And with the Cardinals situation that they're kind of tanking a little bit, they didn't necessarily want to just go ahead and give him a new contract, which led Jacoby Brissett to kind of sit out most of this offseason, which then allowed Gardner Minshew to come in and take all first team reps. And so that's kind of a situation there. And then they go and they grab Carson Beck, quarterback from Miami. He was a quarterback that a lot of people weren't necessarily big fans of. I also wasn't really the big fan of, not only his play style, but kind of his personality off the field. But going into this preseason game, the NFL Hall of Fame game, Carson Beck balled out. He was super efficient. Had 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Also watching him, he looked good in the pocket. There were a few times where he was able to extend plays with his feet. He was able to, of course, escape out of the pocket, go for a first down at one point. Now, with all this being said, this is the NFL preseason. He is not going up against guys that are going to be starters every Sunday. But it was enough of a instance to really captivate my attention and to make sure that I am watching this Cardinals quarterback room throughout this preseason. So I put this little list here, and out of these 3 quarterbacks, I'm going to kind of switch it up. I'm going to go with who I think is going to start the most games this season, because I do think it's a situation where Jacoby Brissett is coming off of a massive is coming off a new contract, is going to be your day 1 starter. But I do think Carson Beck is going to start a good amount of games. So to me, I'm going to do this. I am going to have Jacoby Brissett as the main quarterback going into this season. Okay? I do think he comes in and plays a bunch as well. I don't think Gardner Minshew touches the field. I think throughout this preseason, we're going to see Jacoby Brissett stay quarterback 1, and we're going to see Carson Beck jump Gardner Minshew to be that quarterback 2. So I know that's kind of a lot of jumping around, but I think it's Jacoby Brissett as the starter. Should lock him in. And I should have Carson Beck as well locked in, because he's going to start that back end of the season. Confidence level, again, with the quarterback situation, it can kind of go anywhere. I'm going to say around round of 5, because injuries can also take such a huge part of this. But to me, this is what I'm going with. I think Jacoby Brissett starts the season off, and I think partially of that is just because of the extension he got this offseason. He set out to get paid which he did. I do think Carson Beck jumps Gardner Minshew for the quarterback 2 position, as well as eventually start, to me, at least 5 games for the Cardinals. Part of that is because the Cardinals are also in the tanking situation, and I think they are able to look at all directions when it comes to quarterback, including Carson Beck. So they want to give him plenty of opportunities this year to instate himself as that starter. So kind of the gist for this first team, and it's going to be kind of the gist when I go down the line of 10 different position groups. So next one, go right to Minnesota. One between JJ McCarthy and Kyler Murray. I don't think I need to say too much about this. I think we all kind of have an idea of how this is shaped up to be at this point. JJ McCarthy, he was a former first-round pick, national championship winner in Michigan, was around a really good team, an extremely great defense in college. He was young, he had tons of potential. I'm not saying he doesn't anymore. I'm just saying he had a lot of potential coming out of college. They gave away, they let Sam Darnold and Daniel Jones go in favor of JJ McCarthy, and it has yet to succeed in any sort of way. Kyler Murray was a player who we had just talked about the Cardinals, has started since 2018, 2017, and has had ups and downs, has not had any success in the playoffs. Former first overall pick, signed a huge contract with the Cardinals, and within a year was cut, and the Vikings went and grabbed him. I've kind of mentioned this in previous live streams and previous clips you might have seen, where I do think this Viking season is extremely important, not just for Kevin O'Connell, but to me, it's Justin Jefferson. And while Justin Jefferson still did have 1,000 yards this past season, you could just tell there was so much disconnect between him and all the quarterbacks that they went through. And I could see a situation where he gets upset if he has another poor quarterback kind of situation here. So I think, and through a lot of camp insights and the reports, it's been pretty 50-50. But I do believe Kyler Murray does end up becoming the starter. And I do believe that he ends up starting majority of the games. I just think this team is not in a situation where, especially with kind of like both their offense and defense that are in the higher end of age, I don't think they can go into a full rebuild. And while JJ McCarthy might still have a bunch of potential in the future, it's not a situation where they can risk that potential this year when you have wide receivers and teams just, your players just being completely upset because of your decision. So I'm going to go Kyler Murray to start majority of the games. And I'm going to do this pretty high. Honestly, to me, it's about 8 out of 10 on my confidence level. I think he's a much better player, and I don't think we've seen enough from JJ McCarthy last year, and especially not enough so far this offseason. But I will be super interesting to watch this preseason unfold, especially if they are given similar snap counts. So, but to me, it's a lock for Kyler Murray. Another quarterback battle, and that's Michael Penix versus Tua. Let's start off with this. Michael Penix obviously has been the starter. Well, kind of the starter the last few years. He's dealt with a bunch of injuries. He's been benched. But a big storyline is this. Kevin Stefanski's there now. He has no relationship with Michael Penix. He didn't draft him. He has no relation when it comes to quarterback. And that's a big deal because a lot of times a head coach, general manager will, draft a guy who they're very fond of and then extremely fond of, and then if he outperform or doesn't perform well, then they'll stick to him. But because it's a new head coach and Kevin Stefanski, he has no allegiance to him. So they go and they grab Tua. It's another situation with Kyler Murray where Tua signs a massive deal, gets cut. I think it was like almost $50 million dead money cap for the Dolphins this year. So they go and they get him on a really, really cheap 1-year deal. Both players so far in camp, all the reports coming out is neither one of them have really jumped the other one, as well as they both are also dealing with injuries right now, which is big because that might limit some of their preseason play, which might make this decision harder. From a player perspective, I don't even really know. I think Tua obviously has shown more in the past, but last season for him was rough. I mean, for both these quarterbacks were rough. They both have gotten benched multiple years. Michael Penix with Kirk Cousins, Tua with Quinn Ewers last year. So If I was a Falcons fan, which gladly I'm not, this just is not a great situation to be in. I do think by the end of the year, if both of them are healthy, which both these quarterbacks, there's this very low chance both of them are going to be healthy. I do think Tua ends up starting more games than Michael Penix, and that might be a hot take, which is fine with me. But I do think they are extremely close in talent, but I do think Tua ends up coming out on top when it comes to overall game start, just because he's a little more consistent, which is extremely interesting to talk about. But yes, I am going to go with Tua as the starter for most of the season, at least more games. But I am going to put it as a very low confidence level, just because I can also see a situation where both players are injured the entire year. It's not uncommon between these players. But yeah, I think just a big part about this is right now both players are injured and limited in camp. There's a chance neither of them are going to play the preseason, which is harder, obviously, from an outside perspective to kind of gauge these two quarterbacks. Seem have Jets. Kind of going away from the quarterbacks for a second here, and this one to me is a little bit different. I'm going through their cornerbacks because they have, considering a team that recorded 0 interceptions last year and a very poor cornerback room after trading Sauce Gardner, they have some guys that are very intriguing to me, at least. And I did not add Brendan Stevens. I'm assuming he's going to be a starter outside or inside. But these are 4 guys here who have at least played or started last year or could potentially play this year. Azarius Thomas, Nashawn Wright, who they went out and got, D'Angelo Ponds, who they drafted, and Jarvis Brownlee, who they traded for last year and who started for him. I do think the highest possibility is Nashawn Wright being one of those outside corners. Obviously, he is a very intriguing player. He reminds me a lot of a worse version of Trayvon Diggs from, 2019, where he recorded 10 interceptions. But the situation where it's this, he is very risky as a corner. He has fantastic size. There's a reason why he's bounced around so many teams throughout his career so far. He's extremely risky. He takes every bait possible, which allows him to at times get burnt on a lot of those deep routes, but at the same time allows him to come up with a lot of interceptions. I think a team that's so desperately need to get out of that no interception rule that they had last year, I do think Nashawn Wright is going to start. Now comes the other spots. I do think Brendan Stevens is going to start. He plays a little more of that kind of like nickel role for them, which it's interesting because he's a little bit bigger corner. So I'm thinking this: if Brendan Stevens plays that nickel role, which he has in the past, Nashawn Wright on one side, I do think the other outside is between Azarius Thomas and Jarvis Brownlee Jr. I don't think D'Angelo Ponds is going to start majority of the games in his rookie year. I do think he's going to get a lot of playing time, especially in dime packages. But I do think on the other outside corner, I do think it's Azarius Thomas because you have the upside. He's a very young guy. He was a day 2 pick out of Florida State 2 years ago. And he has great size. He's very similar in size to Nashawn Wright. I do think the two of them are going to start alongside Brendan Stevens in that nickel slot role. But again, this isn't a situation where this team, because they had so lack of success in turnover battle, if they don't see big plays happen between these two, they are going to rotate starters. And that's why D'Angelo Ponds and Jarvis Brownlee were brought up in this conversation, because if Azarius Thomas and Nashawn Wright don't make any sort of positive impact, they will be traded out for these two guys immediately. Because Aaron Glenn and this Jets team is so on eggshells when it comes to defense. So because of all that, my confidence level that these two players, Azarius Thomas and Nashawn Wright, are going to start a majority of the games is low. To me, it's a 3. And that's not because I'm talking about injuries. and like it was in some other cases. It's the fact that this defense is in such a risk of going back and not having another turnover like last year. So to me, it's going to come out to who can make the biggest impact on this team. After that, we have the Jaguars. Kind of cut and dry. One of the biggest stories out of the Jags last year was the emergence of Devin Lloyd. He was a former first-round pick, played for 4 years, was injured some, extremely inconsistent. They decided not to pick up his fifth-year option before going into that fifth year playing, and he balls out. Second-team All-Pro. He was second in the league in interceptions at his position. He was outstanding. He played himself out of a contract with the Jags. He goes to the Panthers for about $14 million a year. So after he leaves, the Jags have a decision to make. They go into this draft. They don't pick up a linebacker until the 7th round, Parker Hughes. And that's because they believe that they had his replacement in-house already. Originally, I think all signs indicated Ventrell Miller. And throughout this offseason, throughout minicamp, training camp, which is now coming up, OTAs, everything, the name Branson Combs has come up more and more. This is a guy who won the award for the breakout workout warrior for the Jags. He's a guy that has been making extreme amount of plays, and these are two very different linebackers. Ventrell Miller is he's a little bit smaller, stout, great against the run. Branson Combs is a former wide receiver in college. He is extremely fluid athlete. He's a guy that's incredible in coverage. They're two very different players. Jack Kaiser is another player that could potentially be in talks, except he has dealt with an injury right now, which he just acquired a few days ago, and that to me kind of kicks him out of potential reps of that first place spot. So I think this is a thing where both players are going to start games. I do think because of the play style early on in games of trying to establish the run, that Ventrell Miller will end up getting the start majority of the season. But I do think that Ventrell Miller will start majority of the games, so I'm going to lock him there. I'm pretty confident about it. I think because a lot of teams want to start the game off establishing the run, Ventrell Miller is going to come in, be that extra linebacker to stop it. But throughout the game, Ventrell Miller and Branson Combs are going to switch off a bunch. The only thing that I'm slightly concerned about is Ventrell Miller has dealt with a lot of injuries throughout his career, both at the University of Florida and with the Jags so far. So that does give me concern when it comes to him starting and playing so many games. But I don't think either of them are going to be as effective as Devin Lloyd was last year. But I think eventually they're going to be okay when it comes to it. I think there's enough talent around them. It's the fight in their third wide receiver. This originally was a little more difficult, but they did just sign Stephon Diggs to a 1-year deal, and I do think Stephon Diggs will immediately come in and be a wide receiver 2 behind Terry McLaurin. But the wide receiver 3, that kind of slot position is up for grabs, and they do have some players that could take it. Luke McCaffrey obviously has played majority of that slot compared to these 3 guys. He has been okay. He definitely has not been as effective as an NFL pro as his brother or his dad, but he has shown promise. Jalen Lane has been incredible in special teams. Now, can he, throughout this training camp and offseason, can he establish that effectiveness from special teams to the offense? That's a story. And then you have Antonio Williams, 3rd round pick from Clemson this past year, who truthfully I think can probably end up taking that slot position. But I do think it's a situation of you have somebody like Luke McCaffrey, who is already kind of a little more of a established pro, has played in that slot position in the pros. And then you have Antonio Williams, who comes from Clemson, hasn't necessarily had the most experienced or productive college career, but is a very fluid athlete, almost a running back style player build, kind of similar to Deebo Samuel in a way, but a lot less, I hate to say thick, but a lot less running backy and more like a Golden Tate situation. It does kind of go back and forth. I think regardless of who it is, they are going to get a significant amount of less targets than both Terry McLaurin and Stephon Diggs, who just recently signed there. I do think beginning of the season, it probably will be Luke McCaffrey as the main starter. I do think as the season progresses, very similar to a few other positions, I do think Antonio Williams gets majority of the starts. But at the same time, this entire offense is very hit or miss with me coming into this next year. Jaden Daniels, while he played, was a little less promising. Obviously, he dealt with a bunch of injuries last year, but in the first few games of last season, he was not as effective as he was as a rookie. I'm very confused about this running game. And then, Zach Ertz is still a free agent. I'm very suspect about their receiving group behind them. Terry McLaurin dealt with a big injury last year. How reliable is Stephon Diggs at this point? And then your third receiver, we're actively having a discussion about. So it's a big situation for me. So I'm not necessarily excited about this offense, but I could definitely see where they could potentially take off like they did 2 seasons ago. But I do think Antonio Williams, by the end of the 18 weeks, does end up starting more games than Luke McCaffrey. I'm super confident. I'm going to say about a 4 out of 10 with Antonio Williams. So that does leave us with 4 teams left. I do 5 position groups. That's because I do have 2 position groups here with the Kansas City Chiefs. One on the offensive line, one on the defensive line. This Chiefs team has been very intriguing. One of the biggest stories is, of course, Patrick Mahomes going out with an injury at the end of last year. Is this the downfall of the Chiefs? Obviously, Travis Kelce there's rumors of retirement. Goes and gets married, has this offseason where he's not necessarily focused on football as he has been in the past. There's been reports of him showing up a little bit overweight. Their offense does not seem as explosive. And one of the biggest stories is their right tackle position. Jawaan Taylor has been the starting right tackle for the last 3 years. He got released and cut and is now part of the Falcons. And it's left with 2 guys. One guy being Jalen Moore, who was signed 2 years ago to be a swing tackle and ended up getting beat out by Jawaan Taylor and Josh Simmons this past year. So was that slotted in spot going into this offseason. And then they get Khalil Benson, who is a undrafted free agent this year, who has taken just as many first team snaps and has kind of showed off a little bit. So to me, it is back and forth. I do think you go if in this situation, especially with Patrick Mahomes, who is literally coming off of a big time injury. I don't see where you don't go with a more experienced offensive lineman who has started more games in his career than an undrafted free agent. So I do think Jalen Moore does end up starting more games. I do think Khalil Benson, it's very promising so far, the buzz that he's having, and he could become a really good developmental piece. This year, I could definitely see him as that swing tackle, but I'm fairly confident with Jalen Moore being that starter throughout the majority of the season. Switching off to the defensive line here with also the Kansas City Chiefs, you have some players last year, so not this past draft, one before. Chiefs take Omar Norman-Lott pretty early on in day 2 from Tennessee. He's a little bit of an older prospect, defensive tackle, has some pass rush ability. Last year, he did not play very much because he suffered a big-time injury that was out majority of the season. So availability so far this offseason has been a little bit questionable, but you like the potential he has because of his ability to pass rush. Then they also go and they get Tonga from the Patriots. They sign him to like a 3-year, $21 to $27 million deal. That's a lot of money. He is coming in to be your majority, your nose tackle. And then they end up using one of their picks in the first round for Peter Woods, who's another big defensive tackle. Peter Woods has played both nose tackle and defensive end he's been all over this Clemson defense. So far, it seems like in training camp, most of the packages that the Chiefs have put into their system on defense is not including Peter Woods in the starting rotation. Khyiris Tonga is more in there as well. So it's a situation of how much are you going to put into this really talented rookie Peter Woods so early on in his career. It's not necessarily the most important position piece. You do still have Chris Jones, but they do love putting Chris Jones at the defensive end position. So I think Peter Woods out of these three do get the most snap counts, but it's very similar to the Ventrell Miller, Branson Combs situation, where because teams want to establish the run so early on in games now, Khyiris Tonga is going to start majority of the games, is what I'm predicting, instead of Omar Norman-Lott or Peter Woods. But I do think Peter Woods is going to play a significant amount, especially on third down situations when you have Chris Jones kind of lined up on different spots and you need that interior pass rush. I could definitely see a situation where you have R. Mason Thomas, Chris Jones, Peter Woods, and the George Karlaftis, or even Omar Norman-Lott more in the middle as well. You kind of play around with it, but I am pretty confident Khyiris Tonga is going to start more games just because of his run stuffing ability. That leaves us with 3 teams left. Going over to Baltimore. This one's been fun. I want to talk about their wide receiver 3 position. Everyone knows the Ravens don't necessarily have the best receiving group. They did just sign Zay Flowers to a big deal. There's reports that he just got injured. They're hoping it's not a very serious one. Rashad Bateman's their wide receiver 2. They paid good money for him a few seasons ago. He's kind of been slightly disappointing since then. And then it's wide receiver 3. Des Walker is the veteran of the group. I think he has like 7 career catches with 4 career touchdowns, which is insane efficiency. That's obviously not something that is sustainable. And then they go and they pick 2 wide receivers in this draft. Jacoby Lane, a very big, lanky receiver from USC. And then Elijah Surratt, another big body receiver from Indiana. Both of these guys, all 3 of these guys kind of play very different positions. Des Walker is almost that speedster. Jacoby Lane is your very fluid kind of slot, big tall slot. I'm thinking a lot of like Keenan Allen per se when it comes to him. And Elijah Surratt is your more, kind of more your possession, one jump ball guy. I know this is not a comparison any Ravens fan really wants to hear, but he does remind me a lot of N'Keal Harry out of college. Someone who's not extremely fast, he's not the best route runner, cannot separate as well as some of these other athletes, but you throw it up there and he will come down with it. I do think what we have seen so far, and I think this preseason is going to be huge, especially when it comes to this wide receiver battle, because all 3 should get significant playing time, especially if Zay Jones is not going to play because of his injury. I hope everything that I've heard from camp is Jacoby Lane has kind of outplayed Elijah Surratt, but Elijah Surratt will play a lot in that goal line kind of situation, with Jacoby Lane primarily playing in the slot, which makes sense for this team. Des Walker, like I said, the insane efficiency, 7 catches for 4 touchdowns. He's kind of that speedster. He can be used more in a gadget situation. So I do think Jacoby Lane comes out on top, and it seems like he's been having a fantastic camp. If he continue that success to the preseason and have a strong couple of outings, I can see where he takes over that wide receiver 3 for a team that desperately needs some more youth and talent in this receiving core. I'm not very confident though, just because this Ravens team has done a bunch. I do like to say that with Jesse Mitchell now as the head coach and what he has seen with Keenan Allen from the Chargers, I hope he sees that Jacoby Lane, at least from my perspective, has some very similar traits and can be used in that slot position. But I'm not the head coach or the general manager. With the Steelers, obviously you go in, you know who your quarterback 1 is. It's Aaron Rodgers. But behind him, you have question marks. You have a veteran who has started for the Steelers a bunch of games, and Mason Rudolph. You know what you have of him. He's nothing more than a game manager. And he, of course, had that situation with Myles Garrett. Not going to talk about it. Then you have back-to-back big body, big arm quarterbacks that you took in back-to-back drafts. Drew Aller from Penn State, Will Howard from Ohio State. The big thing here is with Aaron Rodgers being his last year, they are looking for his replacement. I don't think Mason Rudolph is going to be the replacement going to next year. I do think it's a higher chance that it is Will Howard or Drew Aller. It's also interesting to bring up that this upcoming quarterback draft class seems to have the most talent that we've seen in a long time. I would not be surprised if the Steelers triple dip this next year's draft and take another quarterback. I think the potential and what we've seen throughout college of Drew Aller is greater than Will Howard. But there's also been so many reports of them completely redoing all of Drew Aller's footwork, throwing motion. He's a complete project. So I do think Mason Rudolph becomes that quarterback 2 spot for this year and this year only. That quarterback 3 spot, I do think is still Will Howard. I do think Drew Aller is secretly, on that kind of roster fringe. I think there's a high chance of him getting cut, this year and him potentially being picked up by a different team. I don't know if he necessarily makes it through waivers to go back to Steelers practice squad, but I do think there's a chance that Drew Aller does get cut. I think if Rodgers goes down, the Steelers are more comfortable with Mason Rudolph to come in than either of these 2 quarterbacks. And I think they're more comfortable with Will Howard over Drew Aller to stay in that system because he's there for next year. They have to take a little bit less time with him if he needs to come and take the potential starting spot next year. So I am very confident with this personally, and I think there's a high chance Drew Aller is not a Steeler by beginning of this season. And that leaves me with one more team left. And this one's the biggest stock this whole offseason. Who is the quarterback 1 for the Cleveland Browns? Is it Deshaun Watson? Is it Shedeur Sanders? I'm not even going to throw this out there, but is it Dylan Gabriel, Taylor Green? Who's quarterback 1? It seems like so far, all throughout camp, Deshaun Watson has taken the most first-team snaps. He is kind of the proven guy, but not really. He's had some really high highs of his career and extremely low lows, coming off of 2 seasons back-to-back where he had significant injuries. Then you have Shedeur Sanders, came in last year, played a handful of games, threw more interceptions than touchdowns, was ranked by anonymous NFL personnel that he was the worst ranked quarterback in the league out of 35 quarterbacks. With everything that's coming out and with someone like Todd Monken, who I could see his personality not fitting well with Shedeur Sanders, I could see where Deshaun Watson ends up taking majority of the starts. But at the same time, I also know Deshaun Watson's on a very short leash, and as soon as he's not performing well, even for a single game, all the fans are going to be calling for Shedeur Sanders. I don't think either quarterback gives you any chance of potentially winning any of the games. I do think, just from all the reports coming out in camp, that Deshaun Watson has kind of overtaken that quarterback 1 spot right now. And I do think majority of this preseason snaps will be to Taylor Green, but I'm so back and forth because I'm truly not sure when it comes to this quarterback spot because it's 2 awful options. But I do think all the reports coming out, I do think Deshaun Watson ends up taking majority of the starts. I want y'all to know that as soon as Deshaun Watson makes a few boneheaded plays, which he is going to, because there's also not that much talent around him, fans, everyone's going to be calling for Shedeur Sanders. He's going to come in and he's going to play exactly the same, worse. But yeah, I mean, this is my projected starters and winners of these position battles. Arizona Cardinals, I do think Jacoby is going to start most of the games. I do think Carson Beck gets in a good amount near the end of the season, just because this Cardinals team does not have a lot to win for currently, and why not show what you have in a rookie that played really well in his first NFL action. Vikings quarterback situation again. Kyler Murray, to me, is hands down a whole different level than JJ McCarthy when it comes to talent. I think this is the last we hear of JJ McCarthy for the Vikings after this season. Atlanta, another big quarterback issue. I do have Tua at a very low confidence because, truthfully, I don't know who is going to come out between him or Michael Penix. I like Tua a little bit more with his game management style compared to Michael Penix, who seems like he's always trying to play win now games, like superhero games, and he just does not have enough talent or health to do that. For the Jets, talking about their cornerback room, this is a team that had 0 interceptions last year, And I have starting 2 guys that are very big. One guy leading the league in cornerback interceptions last year, Nashawn Wright, 1-year deal. And Azarius Thomas, he's the guy that has the most upside out of this room. D'Angelo Pons was another option. Jarvis Brownlee. Both of them are also young, but D'Angelo Pons to me in the NFL is going to be a strict slot corner. And I do think Brandon Stevens is going to be your full-time starter in the slot for the Jets. For the Jaguars, it's going to be who is that Devin Lloyd replacement. It's going to be Ventrell Miller, Branson Combs. I do think both linebackers play very similar snap counts. I think because Ventrell Miller is more stout in the run game, he's going to get more starts because teams wanting to establish the run fast and early. Wide receiver 3 for the Commanders. I had it between Luke McCaffrey, Jalen Lane, and Antonio Williams. I think Luke McCaffrey starts off the season, but I do think Antonio Williams very quickly takes it and starts majority of the games. For the Chiefs, I had 2. Start off with the right tackle between Khalil Benson and Jalen Moore. I do think the more experienced veteran in Jalen Moore starts at right tackle, especially with an injured Mahomes. Don't want to risk it. You get the guy that has more starts, more experience. On that defense, their defensive tackle number 2 between Tyrese Tonga, Peter Woods, and Omar Lott. I do have Tyrese Tonga being the majority starter. Again, because of his run-stopping ability, I do think Peter Woods plays more than any of those 3. For the Ravens, I have wide receiver 3 between Jacoby Lane, Elijah Surratt, and Des Walker. I do think Jacoby Lane gets eventually after this offseason, especially if Zay Jones has a significant injury, does not play in the preseason. I think Jacoby Lane gets a huge opportunity to showcase his ability. I do think he's that slot receiver. For the Steelers, it is quarterback 2. I think going into the season is going to be Mason Rudolph, but looking forward, I think Will Howard beats out Drew Aller, and I don't think Drew Aller stays on the roster. I do think Will Howard becomes that long-term replacement after Aaron Rodgers this year. And lastly, the Cleveland Browns quarterback situation, Deshaun Watson versus Shedeur. I think Deshaun Watson gets the start at the beginning of the season. There's a chance Shedeur starts more games, but truthfully, both quarterbacks to me are not very talented. I do think Deshaun plays more throughout the whole season if he can stay healthy. That's the big thing. If he can stay healthy. Seems like Todd Monken has preferred Deshaun Watson so far and has not taken much of a liking to Shedeur, but not super confident about that. But yeah, I think most importantly, football season is started. We just had the NFL Hall of Fame game, and going into next weekend, we have first preseason game. So I think once we kind of get into the season, we will shift a little bit off of this offseason and more into our weekly winners and losers and more topics. James should be coming back the next few weeks. We will be a little more interactive with certain debates and things like that. But without further ado, I do want to thank everyone for the support on all the social medias, including YouTube. I want to thank everybody for tuning in here. I want to thank Jacob Charmonk for sending some roses. Most importantly, I hope you guys have a great weekend and everybody stay safe. And I will catch you guys next time. See ya.